Hi, and welcome to this Nordic Know-How event number 6, and it's regarding district heating and cooling. My name is Caroline Chalier. I will moderate this event, and I'm a part of TEM, a Nordic Center for Sustainable Healthcare. But today we will also have speakers like Johannes Brundin, a colleague of mine, Westin, from the Swedish Energy Agency, David Olerup, Öresundskraft, and Peter Anderberg from Heat Academy. I will show you some introductory PowerPoint. I have presented the speakers for today, and then I present the TEM Foundation, that we have two networks, one regional, CSO Skåne, and one international that's specialized in sustainable healthcare, and it's NCSH. NCSH is the one presenting this report for today, it's the Nordic Know-How report. And we have been in forefront of bringing people together. It's businesses, it's life science, it's official institutions, and it's the healthcare facilitators. And we do that by raising awareness, boost innovations and investments in sustainable healthcare. We bring world-class solutions and ideas to the Nordics, and we deliver Nordic solutions and knowledge to the world about sustainable healthcare. And as you know, the Nordics are in the forefront of sustainable healthcare and the knowledge thereof. This is our members for today. It's about 120-ish members, all from these different sectors like life science, healthcare institutions, official organizations, and businesses within sustainable solutions. In our network, or TEM NCSH has created this platform, World's Greenest Hospital. It's a platform where we showcase sustainable healthcare solutions and products. It's like show us on the market. It looks like this. It's an interactive platform where you can go in and choose the type of solution that you are interested in. It's one way to spread the knowledge about sustainability within healthcare. And today's event is another way to spread the knowledge about sustainability within healthcare. The Nordic Know-How series number 6. So now I would like Johannes Brundin from TEM, or Nordic Center, to present this report. You're welcome on the floor, Johannes. Thank you.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Caroline, for the introduction. So my name is Johannes Brundin, and I'm working for TEM together with Caroline and our colleagues. Today, the webinar of today is about the number 6 in the series of Nordic Know-How reports that we have developed. And this report series, we started to develop it in the beginning of the pandemic in a way of finding new routes out to share knowledge about sustainability within healthcare. And we thought these kind of short reports with practical solutions that are available today can help organizations and hospitals around the world to find new solutions that can help them in their turn to work with their sustainability goals. And in times when it's hard to travel, this is a way to initially find new solutions to look into. So we see that with the population in the Nordics with 30 million, we are not doing a big impact globally on our own sustainability. Even if we go 100% sustainable, that's a very small part of the global impact. So we see it's important to work with international organizations around the world to share the knowledge we know and collaborate together to reach the goals. The technologies that we take up in this report always have reference installations at hospitals in the Nordics. So these are technologies that are available today and have suppliers that can deliver it as well. So it's nothing about 2030. This can be done today. And we want to set up this kind of go-to source to get more information, expertise, finding study visits, and so on. And it's also a way of making information that is available today in Swedish and the Nordic languages also in English, because we see that this doesn't reach an international audience. So we have done these 5 Nordic know-how so far. The first one was Nitrous oxide destruction. We've done geothermal energy, lighting, ventilation, renewable energy such as solar and wind power, and so on, and how everything in relation to how the hospitals can benefit and how they can increase their sustainability performance. These first numbers we have done in collaboration with financing from the Swedish Energy Agency. So they have a Swedish approach within energy and climate, but we see a broader potential to do this in wider context in the future, such as waste handling, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and so on. So yeah, today we're releasing number 6 in this series, and we are looking into district heating and cooling. And we chose this because this is a very common technology in Sweden. No, it's not in every country, especially in the Western world. But we have had it. We have it in most cities in Sweden, and it's usually municipality owned, and therefore also public healthcare has been connected to this system. It has not always been with an aspect of sustainability, but during times we've seen the sustainability aspect growing into this industry as well. And today there are many good examples of carbon neutral energy production. So we also see that district heating and cooling is one of the explanations to why Swedish hospitals have a low carbon footprint. In many cases, the hospitals, just by being in a context of sustainability in the city, and if the city have sustainable infrastructure, that will help the hospital in a way to reach their sustainability goals. We do also see that district heating and cooling is also a robust system for energy to the hospitals, that even can sustain the heat demand in a very hot day, and also deliver heat in the coolest day of the year. Since the energy system is larger than the demand of the hospital, it can cover the whole span of need. But we do also see that it's not only the city that is affecting the hospital. Also, the hospital can be the motor of developing that district heating and other infrastructure in sustainable cities. So, due to the size of the hospital, by doing procurement decisions on sustainable energy. It can even make the energy suppliers to switch their whole system. And in this way, we have got the hospital to change the energy supply for the whole city in a good way, in a sustainable way. And we will hear more about that in one of the next, from one of the next speakers here. So this is a very short summary. We have 3 experts with us today, so we want to give them as much time as possible, and who can give a more detailed explanation of district heating in combination with hospitals. And these are some of the resources. You can find more of the content, and even this presentation will be uploaded to our webpage and shared. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johannes, for your presentation of the report. The next on the floor is Paul Westin. He's a senior business developer at the Swedish Energy Agency, and he will talk about district heating and cooling in Sweden, history and the future. Welcome to the floor, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. Thank you, Johannes, also. Looking forward to having the discussion later. So this was the title I was given, District Heating and Cooling in Sweden, History and Future. I believe I will talk more about history than future, but please, we can all discuss the future also in the Q&A session. As Johannes mentioned, the Swedish Energy Agency is in part funding the platform for sustainable healthcare. And we also have another platform that I'm heading. I will just say a few words about that in the end, which is called Sustainable Heating and Cooling by Sweden. So we have the different tasks at the Swedish Energy Agency. We're the national authority for energy policy issues, and that includes research and development funding, but also internationalization of Swedish innovations. So this is the context where we support, for example, the center. And we have about 200 to 300 million euros per year in transfer of funding and grants. We are situated in the city of Eskilstuna with about 400 employees. So the Swedish heat market has developed continuously. This graph shows quite the astounding development since the 1960s. Of course, we were, as most countries, very heavily dependent on fossil fuels up until the energy crisis in the 1970s. But district heating was already introduced in the late 50s and 60s and has continuously developed in the country. That is the red line. So it's about 60% of the total heat market, and there are more than 500 networks approximately in Sweden, run by approximately 200 companies. But you can also see in this graph that heat pumps are also successful in Sweden and produce we take care of about 20 terawatt hours of heat. So that's the second largest at the moment. Sweden is not very much dependent on natural gas, which is an advantage both to district heating and heat pumps actually. So that's a difference compared to many other European countries. And I guess we are a little bit lucky not to be so dependent on natural gas at the moment. However, of course, energy markets are international, so we are also hit by higher energy prices in Sweden. Well, these are some of the energy policy targets that we have. 100% renewable electricity by 2040, and no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2045, and 50% more efficient use of energy in 2030. These are quite ambitious. On the renewable electricity target, I made a note also that we're not going to close the existing nuclear power by political decisions. So we will see how this actually ends up. And here you can see the share of renewables per sector according to the European Union Renewable Energy Directive. And it's more than 2/3 of renewables in the electricity sector. Actually, I think the latest figure was 71%, and the latest figure for heating and cooling was 66%. And we also have achieved the overall transport target. So this is quite impressive, I think. And how did we get here? Well, some of the drivers for introducing district heating in Sweden, you can see here I've listed the early ones. First, it was actually to increase electricity production in the south of Sweden in medium and larger cities. And then we had also the 1960s and 70s expansion of new housing areas. And this was often done as municipal projects, and also there were municipal energy companies, so that could go hand in hand. Of course, I mentioned also the oil crisis, so that led to coherent energy policies, R&D programs with the aim of reducing our oil dependence, and district heating was identified as an important possibility. We also had the heavy expansion of nuclear power during a decade, 75 to 85, and that actually made Sweden having a surplus of electricity. So a lot of direct electric heating of single-family houses was installed, but also electricity to heat in district heating systems. And cities were also often hampered by air quality concerns. So this pushed also for more centralized heating production in the larger cities. Nuclear power has been contentious in Sweden since the 70s, I would say, and with the Chernobyl accident in '86, we had also a governmental decision to phase out nuclear by 2010. This was later revoked, but the southernmost nuclear power plant of Barsebäck was eventually closed. Environmental concerns are important to Swedes and to the Swedish government, and we were quite early in introducing a carbon dioxide tax, which meant the driver for biomass rather than coal or peat. And then during the 90s and up until early 20s, 2008, there were a lot of discussion about the market design in Sweden for district heating, since it had been deregulated in conjunction with the deregulation of the electricity market. This led to higher prices in district heating, and the response was really to increase transparency towards the customers. This is just to show that among the 290 municipalities in Sweden, there are still quite a few of them that do not have district heating. But where you have district heating, it generally takes 80 to 90% of multiple family buildings as a market share. For detached houses, it's much smaller, and the scale is a little bit different. It's the darkest color on the map to the right is actually 20 to 30% of detached houses. In this graph, you can see also both the expansion overall of district heating in Sweden since 1980, but also the transformation from fossil fuels to recovered energy, which is the blue one, renewables, which is the green one, and also the corresponding decrease of carbon emissions per kilowatt hours. This is just to illustrate that biomass and waste incineration is very prevalent and often used in the district heating networks in Sweden. And I believe this is from the Swedish Bioenergy Association, and I believe they list up to maybe 300 or so networks with biomass or waste. So as Johannes mentioned, district heating companies are often municipality owned. It's still the most common category, but there are other actors also having district energy companies, such as E.ON, for example, or the joint venture in Stockholm between Fortum and the city of Stockholm, Stockholm Exergi. And also our state-owned company Vattenfall is active in district heating. Some of the specific circumstances in Sweden for municipalities might look a little bit different in other countries is that they're generally quite independent and quite strong because they have they're the first instance of income taxation, so they have quite a broad set of responsibilities, but also quite good income. They do have the planning monopoly, which is quite used. It's quite common in other countries as well. I listed below that they, and I mentioned it earlier also, that they often own municipal housing companies under the same holding company as the municipal energy company. So that means that there can be joint planning for expansion of district energy networks. Hospitals, however, they are owned by the regions in Sweden. There are 21 regions, and they do not really engage in energy businesses. However, of course, hospitals are attractive as customers for the district energy companies. And as Johannes mentioned, they could be a starting point for new networks. They could be considered to be developed as an energy center for a local area. So it's a good opportunity if you have a hospital to also start considering developing district energy systems. And some of the drivers and policy measures, I mentioned the energy and carbon taxation. There have been investment grants for biomass, combined heat and power. We also had conversion grants to consumers. There was also a sort of a certificate scheme for electricity, for renewable electricity, which also increased primarily the biomass-based combined heat and power. And of course, also landfill ban of sorted waste and of organic waste has led to a lot of installations of waste incineration, and they are always coupled to the district energy systems. And the carbon tax has a high level in Sweden. It's almost, I believe it's above 120 euros per ton of carbon dioxide at the moment. So that's quite a high level, and which makes fossil fuels not very competitive. Just a few words on district cooling. There are district cooling networks in approximately 40 Swedish cities. It's still increasing, as you can see from the pipe length, the purple graph ever increasing. And public buildings is one of the larger categories, 17%, the green one. So that would include hospitals. Then I had quite an interesting example from Västernorrland, a region in the north of Sweden. This was a project, I believe it was introduced in early 2000s or something like that, where they gather snow from the streets and load it into a large pool. And during the melting process of the snow, you get chilled water, which supplies the local hospital with cooling until September. So if you have those conditions, this might be an interesting example to look into further. As you can see, they have saved a lot of electricity. And some other issues for the future or for district heating. We see, of course, that lower temperatures in the district heating systems is something that is developing. Combinations of heat pumps and district energy networks. One example is E.ON's Ectogrid solution. You also can see that district heating networks and district cooling networks can have a larger role in the flexibility for the energy systems in a city, including, where thermal storage is increasingly interesting, also to be part of handling the need for greater flexibility in the electricity grids. And I also believe that solar thermal is another interesting option. Again, it was in the 70s, but I believe solar thermal is becoming more competitive in the future. I talked a lot about biomass, and it's a limited resource, and it's there's a lot of demand for biomass for different sectors, so it might be interesting to look into this report by Fossil Free Sweden, where they have put forward a strategy for how Sweden could use its bioenergy resource in a wise way in the future. Just a few words on the other platform, sustainable heating and cooling by Sweden. We have 3 focus markets at the moment. It's France, it's China, and also it's the UK. And in the UK, through this platform, we have also identified some of the government-supported projects, and quite a few of them are also connected to NHS, the National Health Services of the UK, or England and Wales rather. So please contact me or contact us, and if you have interest in that. And with that, I believe I have taken my 20 minutes. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. But welcome on the floor. We can hear you very well. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. I was a little bit afraid it was my connection. So Okay, let's go. I'm working at Öresundskraft as head of product management and business development. I've been working as key account manager previously for Region Skåne, and I've actually been employed by Region Skåne before my employment at Öresundskraft. So I'm quite familiar with the hospital and all the stress and energy efforts that they are doing there. So I will give some practical examples of how we are working with district cooling at Öresundskraft, and also then linked to the hospital placed here in Helsingborg. So I will cover, let me see here, that presentation goes forward. Okay, so I will give some brief introduction first, and then we will discuss the district cooling in Helsingborg, both the distribution and the production. After that, I will move into the cooperation that we have with Region Skåne, who is one of those regions previously mentioned. That's the owner of the hospitals in the south of Sweden. And then I will summarize and try to provide some lessons learned out of this cooperation. So Öresundskraft, we are one of those companies owned by the municipality in Helsingborg, so it's the south of Sweden. We are one out of the 10 largest companies, energy and communication companies in Sweden. We're around 400 employees, and besides providing different both services and other types of services and products for our customers, we are also grid owners, and so we have the electric power grid in 4 municipalities in the south of Sweden. We own and maintain the district heating grid in 2 cities, that's Helsingborg and Ängelholm, and we have a district cooling grid in Helsingborg. We also possess 3 plants. One is a heat plant, it's located in Ängelholm. And then we have 2 combined heat and power plants in Helsingborg. And I will go a little bit more into detail in our cooling production later on in the presentation. So district cooling in Helsingborg, it looks like this. It's a 6 kilometers long grid. We have around 50 customers attached to this grid, and it's a mixture, as mentioned previously, with both comfort cooling for public housing and also industry applications. And it's called Lasarettet here, that's in the middle of the right picture, that's the hospital. And down at the left of the picture, we have Westin, that's where we actually have the cooling production close to the ocean. So we think this is a sustainability movement with a bigger picture in mind, and I will tell you when I show you the production later on in what way we think it is. It provides this low carbon footprint. It provides the possibility to actually produce electricity locally in a city. So besides phasing out the fossil fuels, like you saw in the previous presentation, having district heating and district cooling is actually giving us the opportunity to actually produce electricity locally in the city. And that is in terms of challenges regarding the electrification of transports and so on, and also being able to transfer power during long natural grids. Having local capacity to produce electricity is very important. So in Helsingborg, our district heating, that's quite a much bigger network. It's 580 kilometers. We have around 10,000 customers in our district heating network. Today, it consists of 99.7% recycled and renewable energy. It's been a journey throughout many years. And in Ängelholm, it's 99.5%. Our goal is 100% in 2024, but we believe we will reach that in 2023. And after that, we are also looking into CCS, carbon capture and storage. So we hope our district heating and district cooling will have a negative carbon footprint after that. Okay, so looking into the production overview, and here I will show you that we have 5 different ways to produce cooling in our facility. The first one is electric-driven chillers. 2 of them has been in our own possession for quite some time. One of them was actually located in the hospital previously, but moved down to our production facility a few years back when they needed the room for hospital facilities. So it was moved there, and then we have 3 of those, making us, by help of electricity and powered by electricity, produce 14 megawatts of cool water. Then we have 2 heat pumps and those ones are used in the district heating, where we are reusing low temperature heat water or excess heat from different applications and increase the temperature out to our district heating network. Then we can use the other side with cold circuit and get 10 megawatts of cooling out of those 2. And then I will move into the more interesting parts of this, and that is that we a few years ago, and where we actually been awarded Clean Climate Awards, we are producing cooling out of the sea during winter months. Depending on the temperature of the sea, we can get 4 to 8 degrees, and we get a power out of 2 megawatts for this. And it's a closed circuit, so we don't circulate the seawater into our system, but we take it, it's re-entered to the sea, of course, and we are able to expand this solution when needed, when we need more power. The 4th option to produce cooling is that we have an absorption chiller. This one is using heating as fuel. And the smart thing about this is that when the heat demand is lowered during summer months and the cooling demand is increased, we can use the excess heat from our district heating network to fuel our absorption chiller. And in that way, the only electricity that we add to the system is the pumps and the circulation. And by doing that, we get 5 megawatts of cooling out of this. And combining all of those are interlinked with each other. We also have a storage. It's 50 meters high and provides pressure of 5 bar. We can get an instant power out of that for 30 megawatts, but the mean is around, from a daily basis, is around 5 megawatts. So depending on which season it is, electricity price, need of heat, we can run those independently of each other, and in that way make a system where we have a redundant cooling production to our customers. So, and here you see how energy balance throughout the year can look like. You see in the blue bars, the numbers here are representing the different months. And you can see during the cool months, January to April, we primarily run the free cooling from the sea. In April, the sea is becoming a little bit warm. Then we need to add the electric-driven chillers. But in May, that's month 5, we can use the absorption chiller, because then we don't need the district heating to warm up housing, but we can use that power to feed our absorption chiller. And then we use that as our primary source during the summer months up until October, where we start up with the cooling, and then it increases during the fall. So that is how we typically run our system. So to summarize this, we have multiple options for production. It ensures both redundancy and sustainable production. We have a low-level injection of energy using seawater during winter. And then during summer months, we have this excessive heat from local industries. It's both then an excellent heat source during the winter, but then fuel for the chiller during the summer. And as much as 1/3 of our heating during winter months is actually from reuse from local industries. So we have a COP of this system in total around a little bit above 12, which we think is a great measure for a system like that. Okay, so let's then move into the cooperation with Region Skåne. So we have been having a long journey. It's been now around 15 years, closing up to 15 years, with many different steps on the way. I will highlight a few steps. One is that in 2014, we signed a letter of intent where Region Skåne highlighted their goal to be fossil-free when it comes to energy and transport solutions in 2020. And we were already on that path. But that goal and that declaration, of course, made us increase the speed to phase out the fossil fuels that we had left and also start fuels and so on. And this free cooling initiative that I showed you on the previous slide is one of the things that we made out of this declaration. It was not only this one, but of course it was a driving force. The other one is that we have this energy strategy that Region Skåne, it's extremely challenging. It points at where they want to be in 2025 and 2030 to be active part on the energy market and not only consumers. And then we made a pilot together to create an energy smart hospital. And the common goal for us and Region Skåne is to be an energy smart hospital for improved healthcare and reduced carbon footprint. So I will show you a short movie where also the director of the hospital is explaining how important this is for the region. So I will start this.
Vad är egentligen ett sjukhus? Både du och jag har säkert besökt ett sjukhus någon gång. Då vet vi hur skönt det är att möta den kompetens som finns där. Vi vet också hur skönt det är att mötas av värme och omtanke. Från den första kontakten i receptionen till undersköterskan, sjuksköterskan och läkaren. Helsingborgs lasarett besöks av mer än 1000 personer varje dygn. Här föds också 10 barn och över 30 planerade operationer utförs. Med 350 sjukhussängar och 3000 medarbetare är det full rulle dygnet runt. Då är det inte konstigt att sjukhuset är en av stadens största energianvändare. Därför ska ju också sjukhuset ta ett stort miljöansvar utan att det för den skull påverkar patienterna. Då gäller det att tänka energismart och det är precis det som Helsingborgs lasarett gör. Det både frigör resurser till sjukvården och minskar fotavtrycket på miljön.
Men vad är egentligen ett energismart sjukhus?
Ja, det hörs ju nästan på namnet. Att vi ska utnyttja energin på bästa sätt och jag känner ju att alla delar i samhället måste ta sitt ansvar när det gäller detta och det gäller också sjukvården. Det är ju klart situationen speciell här på Helsingborgs lasarett där vi bygger nytt och renoverar. Och då är det lätt att tänka sig att byggnader och nyrenoveringar att det ska göras på bästa möjliga sätt ur ett klimatperspektiv, alltså vara energisnålt. Men vi ser ju det här konceptet att det här är mycket större än så. Utan det är ju all vår verksamhet som vi ska hantera på det sättet. Allt från medicinsk utrustning som vi ska tillse att det är så energisnålt som möjligt. Men också materialhantering och logistik måste vi också kunna göra på ett mycket bättre sätt ur ett klimatperspektiv eller energibesparingsperspektiv. Och i slutändan så gynnar ju detta våra patienter faktiskt, eftersom på det sättet så kommer vi också kunna ha lägre driftskostnader och kanske kunna anställa fler personer då till kärnverksamheten.
Det är ju bra. Att mer pengar läggs på vården gynnar ju dig som bor i Region Skåne. Hej!
Hej.
Oj, oj, oj! Vad har hänt med armen?
Jag skulle rädda en katt från ett träd, men jag råkade hoppa fel.
Oj, oj, oj. Men du, de är supersnälla här. Och röntgen går ju fort. Det kommer gå jättebra. Ja.
Då var det din tur. Du får följa med mig.
Vi på Öresundskraft arbetar tätt ihop med Region Skåne för att på Helsingborgs lasarett kunna optimera deras energianvändning och på så vis minska klimatavtrycket. Till exempel kan vi ta röntgenapparaten här som genererar en hel del värme när den används. Den värmen kan vi sedan samla upp, flytta och använda den på ett ställe på sjukhuset där den kan nyttjas på nytt. Ett annat exempel är att vi kan styra innetemperatur, ventilation och även belysning och på så vis optimera att den energin som används precis rätt där den gör som mest nytta. På så vis blir det positivt både för verksamheten och även för klimatet och miljön. Och på så vis blir det dessutom ingen energi som går till spillo.
Så ur ett längre perspektiv blir ju också de långsiktiga klimateffekterna hälsofrämjande, vilket påverkar folkhälsan positivt. Och håller vi oss friskare, ökar vår egen livskvalitet samtidigt som belastningen på lasarettet minskar. Hej hej! Och grattis!
Tack!
Den var så söt!
Eller hur?
Lycka till nu med allt.
Tack.
Så det handlar om att vi både får mer resurser till vården samtidigt som vi minskar vårt fotavtryck på miljö. Ett arbete som vi alla måste hjälpas åt med. Hej då!
Hej då!
För det är bara tillsammans som vi kan nå klimatmålen. Här i staden, i Sverige och globalt.
Okay, so summarizing this from the movie. So from the hospital perspective, being energy efficient and having sustainable operations, it is a competitive advantage. And I would say it is for every business. It's both to be cost efficient, but it's also a matter of a profile to attract young individuals that would like to work in an environment and for a company that cares about climate and our planet. So I think it gains both the individual perspective, but also the business perspective. I would say that ambitious sustainability agendas in local society, like hospital, like regions, they actually drive transformation towards those sustainable solutions. I think, truly believe it is possible to have win-win situations and create those both business-wise, but also when it comes to the environment. Establishing partnerships where you share goals is a key factor. I would say when it comes to healthcare, ordinary efficiency goals when it comes to energy are not always appropriate. Some operations within healthcare should consume a lot of energy, for instance, X-rays and stuff like that. And then we cannot only measure that they reduce the energy usage. It has to be balanced with the quality of provided care. I would say that those long-term partnerships, they lower the risk of investments. And I would say in the new paradigm that we stand for, it's a paradigm where customers are not only regarded as consumers, but also as resources in a more balanced, going from a centralized to a distributed energy system. We need to do this together. And I think this example is one of those. So by saying that, sorry for consuming maybe a little bit more time than I had, but I'm leaving the floor back to you, Caroline.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David, for the presentation and for the nice video. Francisco commented that on in the chat. Very nice video. We will leave the floor to Peter Anderberg. He is founder and CEO of Heat Academy. And Andreas, you will have possibility to ask questions in the Q&A session after Peter has taken the floor. Welcome on, Peter.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this session. I'll share my screen, and I hope it is visible now to all of you.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Perfect. So thanks again. And my name is Peter Anderberg. I'm based in Stockholm, the city you can see on this picture. I'm the founder of a few activities. I'll come back to that shortly. I know this is a session about hospitals, but hospitals and most other buildings in Stockholm are actually connected to heat networks. So it all relates, and I will cover district energy as such in this session, but primarily focus on how can you get a heat network installed and into operations. What are the steps and what are the key components to be able to build capacity to actually be able to do that. So Heat Academy, first of all, it's a training platform. We're focusing on sharing and experience and delivering training in the area of decarbonizing heating and cooling. So it's a bit wider than just district heating. District heating is the technology providing this. We cover district heating, but also other related technologies like heat pumps, energy efficiency in buildings, and so on. Our key focus is on training, but we also provide services in terms of advisory services, where we bring in peers from the Nordic region to support project owners in new district energy markets. We also have services related to facilitating market entry for the suppliers. I'll come back to that. I'll start this presentation from a very high level. This is the primary energy consumption globally. As we can see, or I can at least point it out, 80% of all energy we consume on the planet today is fossil fuels. 80%, and that ratio 80-20 has been in place for the past couple of decades. And if we look at the red line, the expectation is that the demand for primary energy will increase as the world, develops in economic growth. So the projection is quite clear. We're going to need more and more energy. The black line is what is basically, hopefully was agreed in Glasgow more recently, that we need to reduce the use of fossil fuels in order to comply with the climate emergency requirements. And as we can all see, there is a fairly big gap between the demand for energy and the supply of fossil fuel, which is today the main source of that energy. And the question is, what can we do instead? And in which order should we pick the apples in the tree? Heating, and that's not a surprise in this kind of presentation, heating is one of the areas we should look at very closely. If we look at heating in the Northern Hemisphere, it represents some almost 40% of total CO2 emissions. So almost half of all the CO2 emissions we generate in the Nordic Hemisphere comes from heating buildings. Most of the heat is generated by gas, and a lot of the gas is imported, at least to Europe. North America has a different situation, very much self-sustained, but Europe is importing a large share of the heat, of the gas we use for heating. So the question is, coming back to my previous slide, to try to bridge the gap that we have in the primary energy supply. Is it possible to actually cut out CO2 emissions from heating? And how could we do that, and at what speed? And to answer the first question, yes, it is possible. And this is how it has been done in the Nordic region. If we look at the primary energy input, as you saw on my earlier slide, about an hour as a column, all that energy is used to produce heat, but also to produce transportation, to produce power, industrial processes, and so on. In that process, when we transform fossil fuels into energy, we lose a lot of the energy content. Most of it, or at least 2/3 of it, disappears as energy losses. However, if we could somehow connect the buildings we want to heat and connect them to a heat loss. We heard about Helsingborg, where we can talk about other cities where they've done exactly this, to find a heat loss in the city, connect that heat source from a chemical plant, from a pulp and paper plant, or even from a power plant, and share that heat in a network. Then suddenly the waste, what is used to be called waste heat, becomes a resource. And those emitting the waste heat can actually make money on selling the waste heat they previously emitted out in the sea. So there is an economic incentive to do this, but obviously there is also an incentive to do this from a primary energy input point of view. A very efficient way of actually closing the gap we had on the first slide. And this is basically also being the platform you can use as you move forward to replace and add other heat sources to a heat network. And one of the buildings on this picture is a hospital, but obviously it can be connected to any type of building. This is basically how Sweden did it to decarbonize heating. We implemented heat networks in this way. And over time, we were able to convert the energy input from fossil fuel into more sustainable heat sources like biomass, which has been mentioned, but also, as I mentioned earlier, waste or residual heat from industrial processes. And it's all about looking at the time horizon here. To build a network like the one you saw on my very first page, covering the 90% of the buildings in Stockholm, it's not done overnight. And there is a lot of pain in doing it over time, because you need to disrupt traffic, you need to open up trenches all across the city, and it takes basically decades to get this in place. And I often get the question, what's the profit of this? How much make money? Is it really worthwhile doing it? Can we get a payback in 3 or 4 or 5 years? And I grew up on a farm. My grandfather planted trees. When he planted trees, he didn't think about his profit. He was thinking about the profit in the generations to come. And I think we should have exactly that perspective when we look at district heating as well. This is something that is needed to decarbonize, as you could see on previous picture, but it's not something that will give a return overnight, immediately. But over time, once you've done it, it gives a very, very healthy profit. We can ask Öresundskraft later what it looks for them in terms of the profits they generate to the city owning them. And it goes the same thing with trees. You plant trees and then in 50 years' time, you can harvest them. So what's the secret? Well, the secret is to connect as many as possible. And in Sweden, over time, and I can take no credit for that, I mean, it was done in the generations before me, and we can actually just harvest the benefits from this now. But everybody has it basically, or almost everybody has access to it. And obviously hospitals being in this focus of this presentation, hospitals do have it as well, obviously. What's interesting in recent years is that it has been possible to connect greenhouses, thereby growing tomatoes and other vegetables locally, despite being in a very cold climate. So how did this come about? I think it's quite interesting, because as we can see in these days, history repeats itself clearly. And I'll come to that. This is where I grew up. This is a house. We actually lived on the 2nd floor. We had individual fireplaces in every single room, and we had to carry up logs for the night and during the day to keep these fireplaces hot. That was typical in most houses in Sweden after the war. But then in the following decades, central heating was being installed. Central heating having one single heat source in a building and sharing that heat with the different rooms you have in the building. This was very popular in Sweden. Obviously, it was much more convenient. And by 1970, including our house, many buildings were connected to a central heating system with a central boiler, and the central boiler used oil. Now, oil is not something we produce locally in Sweden. We import 100%, and we did import 100% of all the oil we consumed. And that put us in a very tricky situation, which was obviously manifested by the oil crisis in 1973, which was then followed by a series of oil crises. So what to do? We don't have gas, we don't have oil. What can we do to address this dilemma? Well, the strategy, not only in Sweden, but in the Nordic countries, was, first of all, conservation. Huge investments in conserving energy in buildings. Small buildings, but also large buildings. Replacing windows, putting in place insulation, and so on. That was an accelerated scheme with aim, obviously, to reduce the demand for energy to heat our buildings. The next step, followed a few years later, was to connect buildings that had central heating and before, as I mentioned before, but to connect them to a shared heat source, a community heating solution, a solution where a cluster of buildings actually could share the same boiler. So that was the next step in the strategy: conserve first and then connect. That didn't matter in the early days whether it was connected to a gas boiler or an oil boiler. The idea was to connect and to grow the network, to add more and more buildings. The more buildings we add to the network, the more freedom we have to select alternative heat sources. So in the third step, once we have been able to connect large parts of cities to heat networks, we could gradually start to convert the heat source into something different. But we wouldn't have been able to do that unless we had connected the buildings in the first place to an external heat source. So the connection is critical to be able to get to the stage where we can actually decarbonize heating altogether. So I will share the slides. We don't need to repeat that again. And as has already been presented by previous speakers, we have a very, very small share of fossil fuel in the district heating system and in the heating system in general in Sweden today. And all of that very much as a result of a crisis back in the 70s, although there obviously were other drivers behind this as well. But that was a very critical catalyst to this development. Overall market share in Sweden in general, 55%. And if we look at the picture I showed initially, 90% or more in Stockholm. Now, this was done for two reasons originally. It was about energy security, the oil crisis. And we can tick off that was sorted. We don't need to import very much oil or gas or coal today to heat our homes, as you've seen on previous slides. But there was also another benefit from this, which we rarely talk about. Had we continued to import oil, we would have a significantly worse outcome in our balance of trade. There are different estimates on this, but a figure you often see is that we save 5 billion, equivalent of 5 billion euros annually by not importing oil, but rather using local resources or industrial waste heat for our heating. If we would translate that to an economy of the size of UK, that would represent almost 25 billion pounds annually. So this is an argument also, and it also explains how we could how we could fund the investments in these huge systems. As we developed the systems, we reduced our need for fossil fuels, and we could gradually reduce our imports, and thereby more and more of the money were kept in the local economy, not only in Sweden, but also in the very local economy of communities, thereby generating jobs, inward investments, but also being a very affordable and convenient heat source. So it was all triggered by energy security concerns, but looking back, we could see now that a lot of other things, positives, emerge from this. And obviously, from a current point of view, it is a strength in relation to an international crisis that the world is facing today, where Europe gets 40% of the gas from Russia and most of the gas used for heating buildings. Obviously, what has been the debate in the past decade, or perhaps more, has been pollution control and the climate crisis. That has been those have been the very strong drivers to drive this forward, to connect hospitals and other buildings to heat networks. And now, and there is a very strong interest for these technologies in many countries. We meet that on a daily basis. How do we do it? What are the technologies to be used, and what are the strategies to actually get the technologies in place? What we see history, it's repeating itself again. As I mentioned before, 40% of the gas comes from Russia. We have a new energy crisis, perhaps even more dramatic energy crisis today, at least with the eyes of ourselves today. And this is obviously not a very good situation. And a figure that has been figuring in newspaper in recent days is that some $700 million a day of commodities are procured from Russia, but that includes metals, etc. as well. But we could perhaps say that half of that, or perhaps almost 400 million a day, is the value of the gas we procure every day from Russia. And how do we replace that? Well, I've said it before, there is a very strong drive to develop heat networks and related technologies across Europe to basically do the same thing as we've seen the Nordic countries were able to do starting in the 70s. And there are projects all across Europe, and more of the projects are actually moving in now to delivery, which is fantastic to see. And obviously the drive is to get the same benefits, most importantly short-term, the climate crisis, but also energy security concerns, but to get that in place. Our ambition in this is to try to facilitate in driving projects from preparation into delivery. There are lots of projects underway. There have been lots of projects underway for many years, but many projects are halted or stalled due to issues, challenges in terms of costs, revenue, profits, risks, etc. And there is a need to bridge the gap to make sure we get more and more projects into delivery. And this is basically what we do. I will be very quick on this, but what we try to bring into the table is sharing best practice from those with a long experience in this field in Sweden. Öresundskraft was one of the founders of this activity, Nordic Heat, that we launched some 8 years ago, providing peer-to-peer advisory services, basically professionals from Öresundskraft sharing their best practice to colleagues now trying to do the same thing in other countries. We have the training platforms. We have capacity building where we try to facilitate market entry for suppliers, not only from Sweden, but also from other countries to these markets where we see a very strong interest and growth. If we look at the need for training, UK has an ambition to take district energy from 2 to 20% in the next 25 years. That represents, it is estimated, to 100,000 people that need training in the very near future to be able to do that. It also involves energy efficiency measures in hospitals and other large buildings. Where do we find these people? And we need them in the next 5-6 years. It's already a bottleneck to the industry that we don't have that resource. As this is example the UK. So that is why there is a need for training. I went to the wrong direction. And that's what we do in collaboration with local universities and colleges in various markets in terms of professional training, but also vocational skills. And we have an overview here of training programs we provide, of which hospitals would fit into the building efficiency block retrofit strategies. More to say on this, obviously, but I think I cut my presentation here and available for questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Peter. So nice to hear all the solutions and before looking for the future. We are now up to the questions and answers, where all the audience can ask questions to the speakers. I actually already have one question. It's from Andres, and he asked, with regard to storing heat and cooling, is there a separate storage for both, or is there one storage that is either warm or cold? I don't know if it's Paul or David that's most suitable to answer that one. David is up. Welcome on.
Okay, so what we produce, we have separate storages for heating and cooling. So since we have customers that have we deliver cooling all year round, since it's both for industry and comfort cooling. So in order to do that, we have a separate storage capacity for cooling, and then close to our combined heat and power plants, we have the same, even larger storage capacities for heating.
In addition to that, if you have the possibility to have, for example, an aquifer storage, or you can have seasonal storage, then it can be both actually in the same same system, but for day-to-day storage, different storages.
But I assume both have their trade-offs, right? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else having a question in the audience?
I can also add, we in the reports that we have done, we have also covered geothermal energy and sustainable energy production, and it goes very close together in many cases, but we try to take like a separate tracks in this. But the more we talk about energy production and these networks, it becomes more of different solutions that are combined together with, we talked about snow cooling before, and geothermal energy and so on. I think if someone could talk a little bit more about how the hospital could be a part of this kind of development of helping the smart city to develop in this kind of world, connecting these kind of energy sources.
Well, I can start then by doing a general comment. I think you need, in order to drive transformation in the energy system, it's normally, as Peter mentioned as well, huge investments involved. And in order to do that in a sustainable way, business-wise as well, and in order for it to be competitive for the business that actually then is a customer to the energy service, it has to be done in a scalable way. On the other hand, you need some sort of start driver. It could be a large industry. It could be where we have a long-term agreement. And there, I think larger hospitals are that stable actor in the local market. If they have a environmental and sustainability agenda that is driving in a certain direction, it will actually, if you partner with those, you can actually have a win-win situation where it's not their core business to develop energy solutions like this. That is our core business. On the other side, it has to be beneficial for them and for their business as well. So I think that for them being this driving force and find those partnerships is a good starting point at least. And then once I think hospitals in general are trustworthy parties. So if a hospital is saying that, okay, this is a good option, we will go for this, then more people will join, or other companies will join as well, because they want to be in that sphere of parties driving those solutions. That's at least my experience.
Yeah, I agree also that in order to get these heavy investments off the ground, then you need to have the energy load, and hospitals are excellent for that as a starting point, together with other maybe industrial estates or convention centers or large shopping malls or huge office buildings. So that's usually how, for example, the district cooling businesses in Sweden started by identifying these large customers and then developed from there. And although district heating systems maybe started a little bit differently, but I think it's quite similar.
Okay, thank you. We had one question, but it was very similar to Johannes' question, so the answer at least. So I think I asked for in the chat, I asked if there are any further questions to the panelists. You're mostly welcome to ask them now. I can ask Öresundskraft then. How, I don't know if it's a too narrow question for you, but how was the financing with and the cooperation with Region Skåne? I mean, incentives to do this kind of cooperations, where are they, and how, if we will accelerate those kind of cooperations in the future, how do you do it otherwise?
So I mean, those investments like in free cooling and so on, it's quite big investments. Of course, we make a business proposition for them for them to some sort of long-term contract. So we know that we have some sort of base load, or we have a customer that actually is able to fund the base. But then it's up to us to get other customers to jump on that track. So it's not like that they are financing. It must be a sustainable business from our side. For all development projects that we've been driving together with Region Skåne, it has been in that way that we actually we see it as an investment where we learn and we cooperate, and they learn and we cooperate, and we both parties stand for their own costs. And if it's hardware installation and things like that on their side, they stand for that. If it's hardware installations and things like that on our side, we cover that. And I would say that this cooperation that has been for many years now, driving this in the society, where they have been renovating the hospital, they've been facing some challenges in renovating this old hospital in the city center of Helsingborg. So it has actually just 1 year ago been a decision where they will, in around 2030, move this hospital to the outskirts of the city instead. So, and by doing that, that's also a growth area for the whole city. So what we are doing now is that all the experience and partnership that we have on the current site where the hospital is located today, then we bring that in order to develop a new part of the city where the hospital is this big driving force in that area. In terms of cooling, we have a cooperation ongoing and common investigations. We will not be able to connect that to our current district cooling network because it's too far out. But now, but they have the need, of course, for cooling in the same way as they have today. So what we are looking now is to be able to create this island network with other industries around that area in order to supply that. So that's one way to, okay, we have a cooperation today, and then what happens in both the businesses after a while, the cooperation moves on in a different direction.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. It makes things much easier if other ones would like to jump on the same track, so to say. I have one question here. What are the typical counter arguments towards district heating? If all was positive way, why don't all countries have it?
Well, that's a clever question. There are some different answers I could give. But first of all, district energy doesn't have the same, for example, European legislation that is common. So each country has to also develop the institutional setting. That's one difficulty. Also for the politicians to have the knowledge on how to do that in the best manner. I'm not saying that Sweden has been perfect in that, not at all, but I mentioned the transparency issue, for example, and we didn't have a price regulation. So customers would be also afraid of getting locked into a system and not being able to change if they're not happy with the supplier. So that's a couple of arguments. One argument that I think we can debunk is that district energy systems are communist systems. That was a little bit the feeling in perhaps in the era of Mrs. Thatcher and others in the Western world, even though district energy was actually invented in the US. So it's far from a communist system.
Okay, thank you so very much. Is there any other question that you would
I'd like to add a few points to this, why it's not happening. I think I agree fully what Paul is saying. But district energy is a political project. It's a political initiative. It's not necessarily a short-term investment project. It's like a road network. How quick is the payback of building a road network in a city? You have to do this from a political driver. Then we can see, based on experiences where it has been done, that it's a very profitable, both commercially but also in terms of socioeconomic benefits in the communities. But you can't expect the market to solve this on its own. You need to drive this politically with regulations, but also with the leadership to get it done. And I think often we look at, we have it come into a debate. What's the payback time of district heating and so on? It's not 5 years, it's not even 10 years. It's probably 25, 30 years. But there is another argument I often use. What is the alternative cost of not having district energy? And I think all of Europe is faced now with alternative cost of not having an alternative to gas. And what is the cost of that? How do we monetize that, both from a commercial angle, but also political? So I think a crisis is needed, obviously, because that happened in Sweden and the Nordics. But that's basically my answer to it. You need to have very long-term thinking, and you need to look at alternative costs, whether it's the climate emergency or it is a geopolitical crisis like we have now. But we can talk a lot about that particular question. It's quite interesting, actually.
And I totally agree, Peter. And you asked me if I could comment on what the result that we provide to this municipality. Just 2 years ago, we had a public voting in Helsingborg if the local energy company should be sold. I think it was voted down with much more than 90% of the citizens that wanted to keep us as their own energy company. We have a turnover of 250 million euros, and we provide a net profit to the municipality around 30 million euros every year. And that goes then to school, care for elderly, and so on. So I think that being a local energy company, working heavily with district heating and cooling and so on is in the long term a profitable business.
I can perhaps to add to that, it's a natural monopoly, and that's why it's probably not a good thing to have in private hands. No. Had it been a private investment company owning it, the money would not stay necessarily in the city being reinvested. The money would probably be off to the Cayman Island or something. That was my last input to this.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question on that. You said it is a political decision, but if let's say we have a hospital here that want to build building a new hospital or new department or refurbishing, how should they think in developing their new energy system, and if they can consider district heating or local networks, so to say, maybe in the next step influence the local politicians to take decisions on a larger scale, upfront. How can the hospital talk for a stable heating network?
I think one way is to have a sustainability agenda driving to a long-term target, because it's long-term investments. So for instance, 10 years up front, saying that we want to be 100% have a fossil-free energy source, and ask the other stakeholders in the city, well, how could you help us doing that? I think those long-term initiatives is you need to have a strategic mindset in order to facilitate others to take that role, also in the local society. Setting those challenging goals was 1 year ahead or something like that. That will make it impossible to meet those challenges, because they are too hard to solve. That's one aspect, at least.
Okay, we had one comment here from Stephen Law. We had a similar problem in Toronto some years ago when toll highway was sold to private industry. The cost to drivers doubled and all profit left Canada to overseas owners. We are actually in the end of this session's time. If you have any further questions, please ask them now, and then we will sum up the event. So do you have any questions left? Please raise them now.
And I will just make an invitation and say that if you are around the south of Sweden, you have Johannes' contact details, and in the presentation you also have mine. So if you have some sort of delegation from abroad or locally here from Sweden as well, you are free to contact me, and we can set up site visits and things like that as well. So it's an invitation.
Thank you so much, David. Anyone else? Paul, for example, would you like to raise something? Or anyone else? David?
No, but thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure. And please contact me if you have any further questions.
And Peter, do you would like to say some last comments?
I think he had to leave for another meeting, but yeah, I would like to follow up on David's comments there. This is an interesting topic to work on, and we have a great network of other networks working in district heating, and we are working with sustainable healthcare, and this is where we meet in a very good way, so we can work together with this on these tasks. And I would also like to encourage everyone to visit worldsgreenesthospital.org and our resources that we have published it in the chat. This video will also be uploaded to our webpage, and you can revisit it any time. And thank you everyone for participating.
Yes, please, thank you. And we have one question here, or one, the one who would like to follow our works and the Nordic Know-How's reports, please follow Tim and the Nordic Center for updates. We have newsletters and so on, and there you can see when the next Nordic Know-How report releases. So thank you very much for today. I hope you join us the next time, and a special thank you to the panelists. So have a nice Monday evening.